Let's talk to Rudolf Eliott Lockhart now, Chief Executive Officer of the Independent Schools Association, because it looks as though Bridget Phillipson hasn't finished with independent schools, you know, not content with putting VAT on them so that an awful lot of people couldn't afford to send their kids there anymore, closing down an awful lot of the schools. She's now decided that she's going to charge them up to 3 times more for Ofsted inspections because they can afford to pay. Let's find out what it's all about. Rudolf, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. It's great to be with you.
Good to see you. You might think that she had some kind of, wish to sort of silently kill off private schools, like as if she's ideologically against them.
Well, it's difficult to know what's really going on inside anyone else's head, so I don't know what the motive that Bridget Phillipson has might be. I think what's important to see here, though, is we've got 2 different organisations that currently inspect independent schools in England. So you've got Ofsted, but there's also ISI, Independent Schools Inspectorate, and the majority of independent schools aren't inspected by Ofsted.
Right.
So for most independent schools, the cost of inspection is already being entirely covered by the school. And in my organisation, ISA, we've helped hundreds of schools to move away from being inspected by Ofsted. So we've already helped to significantly reduce the costs of inspections to the taxpayer. But the schools that we're talking about today, the independent schools that Ofsted inspects, they tend to be smaller schools and schools with lower fees. Ofsted also inspect nursery settings when their children are under 2, and they also inspect residential special educational needs schools. So I know that the government seems to be getting some policy headline that makes it sound like they're squeezing the big and the wealthy and the famous schools that people usually have in mind when they hear about independent schools. But the reality is that they're actually looking to increase the costs on nurseries, on special educational needs schools, and on lots of low fee schools. So yeah, it looks like the government's playing to the gallery here rather than dealing with the detailed reality of actual schools.
And I mean, small amounts as well here, aren't they? It says here in a piece I'm reading, figures disclosed by ministers earlier this month reveal the annual cost of providing Ofsted inspections to private schools is about £6.5 million. And they're saying only 2.2 million of that is recovered in fees charged by the watchdog. So left-wing Labour MPs have urged ministers to end the subsidy in full. You're talking about, £4 million or thereabouts, which wouldn't keep them in, migrants for about 3 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And set that 4 million in shortfall against the tax revenues that come in from the independent sector, and you really see how minor the issue should be understood as. So independent schools support £5.1 billion every year in tax revenues to the UK exchequer. That's the equivalent of 115,000 full-time nurses. And they also save £4.4 billion every year in providing places for people who'd otherwise be in the state sector. So if you see those savings for the taxpayer there and the tax revenues coming in against what was it you were saying, £4 million of the lost cost here of the Ofsted inspections, it's very marginal.
Yeah.
And as I say, it's the cost of funding those nurseries, those special educational needs schools, and those low fee schools. It's really not the stereotype that I think the government is trying to trade in.
No, exactly right. And of course, when the 20% VAT was put on schools, a lot of people said at the time they didn't need to start it when they did. They could have waited until, this actual academic year and done it in September instead of doing it back in January rather. But they said that they were going to get that money in from the VAT rise, and they were going to get 6,000 more teachers into the state system. As far as I know, they haven't hired any teachers into the state system, and instead what they've done is made sure that an awful lot of private school children have now gone into the state system, thereby putting more pressure on it in many parts of the country. So it's kind of backfired as a fundraising event, and also as an improvement to the state system.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, the money that's come in from VAT hasn't been ring-fenced to be spent on education. It's just gone straight into the general pool. Yeah. I would much rather be having conversations with the government about what we can do to help with the recruitment of more teachers. So there's all sorts of things that we might be able to do if the government wanted to work with us, where we might be able to get a consortium of independent schools together to cover training of new teachers, maybe use the apprenticeship levy there, and use that as an opportunity to get more teachers trained and then move into the state sector. That sort of approach will be much more collaborative collaborative and would have a much bigger impact on education nationally. But instead, we're dealing with what feels like headline grabbing stuff rather than sensible policy detail.
Yeah, well, you would think that Bridget Phillipson would have more to do with fixing the education system. She seems to spend most of her time talking about freeing up Palestine and also somehow campaigning for her job as Deputy Prime Minister. She was up in Scotland yesterday, where she doesn't have any remit on education, campaigning. And it's like, excuse me, you're a cabinet minister. Shouldn't you be doing your job based where you're supposed to be?
Well, politicians are always going to do what politicians do. What I would like
Yeah, but the trouble is they're doing it without money.
Well, yeah, no, I realise that. What I'd really like to have Bridget Phillipson do is recognise how diverse the sector is. The point is that if you are independent, it means that you don't have to do things in the same way as everyone else. So it means that independent schools are very varied. And I wish that meant that we could have a more nuanced approach to the sector to recognise that independence. Otherwise, the harm that might be done if this change comes in will be done to those smaller local lower fee schools and to special educational needs provision.
Yes, and that's already been a big problem for parents of special educational needs children, isn't it?
Absolutely. We saw this with the impact of VAT. It's hit those types of schools, those smaller schools, special educational needs schools, much harder than the big famous ones. And this is going to be potentially another element of that squeeze. It's not good policy. Maybe the government thinks it's a good headline for them, but it's not good policy. And I would really welcome working closely with them to make sure that we got something really sensible out of this that would genuinely benefit the entire country's education system.
Yeah, I think you're right. Rudolf, thanks very much indeed. Rudolf Eliott Lockhart, Chief Executive Officer at the Independent Schools Association. The problem is, of course, that Bridget Phillipson does have an ideological bent against private schools.